Welcome, everyone. This is Susan Francis, the Deputy Director at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. I want to welcome you today to our name change training. A few housekeeping points before we jump in today. The PowerPoint for today's presentation is loaded in the handout section, which you can download for yourself. We will also make both the PowerPoints and this recorded training available on our recorded trainings page under the volunteer tab on the MVLS website. We will, as we go through the presentation today, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, and we'll try to monitor that throughout the training, and we'll certainly look at that at the end of the training. Before I turn over the reins this morning to our wonderful volunteer attorney, I'm going to ask you all to do a little bit of work here. We want to get a sense of the kind of experience that you all have doing name changes. So I'm going to launch a poll here that's going to ask you whether you've done a name change case before. And if you can just please type in your answer, whether you have done one or not, that will give us some guidance about the level of experience that folks on the call today have. Okay, thanks to everyone for participating. If you haven't, if you could just go ahead and type that in. Great, so I'm going to close this poll. It looks like 64% of you, 67% of you have not done name changes before, which is great. So we'll get some new experience here. And I'm going to launch one more that asks about whether you have any experience correcting birth certificates. And if you could respond to that as well, so we can get a sense of your experience there, and then we're going to jump right into the training. Okay, so it looks like very few folks have experience, which is again wonderful. So 88% of you. Thanks everyone for typing in. It keeps changing. So 82% of you have not had experience doing that before. So again, that's wonderful. That's exactly what our training today is set to do. So I'm going to not require you to do any more work. Now you can sit back, and I'm happy to introduce Chris Rahl, who is an attorney at, I just went blank, Gordon Feinblatt. Chris is really a fantastic volunteer attorney of ours, is a former board member, and has a wealth of experience taking name change cases that he's going to talk to you about. So let me just close this up so you can see a little bit better the presentation, Chris, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, good afternoon. Chris Rahl here from Gordon Feinblatt. I wanted to first tell you just a quick snippet about myself, only to show you that even somebody with my strange background can do name change cases. I was in-house for a long time at financial institutions, so I was doing a lot of financial institution regulatory compliance work and wanted to have some way to feel more like a lawyer and get to look at the Maryland rules once in a while. So I started with I did an actual guardianship case first, and then did a few of those, and then moved to try name changes. And once I did one, I was hooked. And it's the ideal pro bono case because it gives you the right mix of getting into the rules a little bit, enough substantive drafting to feel like you've done something, but there's generally no hearing and no trial to go to. So you don't have a court appearance pop up to mess up your day job, which it's just a nice kind of an assignment because you can work on it when you have the right blocks of time, you can file the things that you need to file, and then you can pester the court to move it along to get the result. So, and you can do that when it's convenient for you, which is why I've always liked it. So just, I'm now at a firm at Gordon Feinblatt. I do financial services, regulatory, and healthcare regulatory stuff. So again, I have nothing to do in my day job with domestic relations, name change stuff. So just wanted to comfort you that this is something that anybody can do. So with that, let me make sure I understand, okay, how that works. Perfect, okay. I'm working the PowerPoint. So why change your name? There are lots of reasons. Clients come to MVLS because they've gotten married, there's a divorce, they adopt someone, change their gender. Another reason that I have done a lot of name changes in connection with is a mother finds out through paternity test some years after a child has been born that the father is not the father. And so a lot of times minors, birth certificate, the minor will be named with the last name of who the mother thought the father was. That person will be listed on the birth certificate as the father, and then the mother is trying to get some child support. Usually there's some battle about that. There's a paternity test, and lo and behold, the paternity test comes back and that person is not the father. So now you have a situation where the name doesn't really fit, and the mother usually wants to change the child's name back to her maiden name, or to another person who she has identified as someone she now knows as the father. So that's just another example of a situation where a name change usually comes up. You can't change your name for a bad reason. You can't do it for fraudulent purposes like to defraud creditors, can't do it for any other illegal purpose. And the courts will not let you do it if your name is going to interfere with the rights of someone else. Like it would be difficult to change your name to Barack Obama probably, or something like that. So those are reasons why you might change your name. Let me try to move the slides along. Hold on, I went too far. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm going to probably jump around on my PowerPoint, so you may hear me talk about some things that are not on the slide. I first, before we get to the next slide in the PowerPoint about the general guidelines, I wanted to talk about the petition itself. The framework, before we get to the petition, I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about where the name change basis comes from, and it's in Maryland Rule 15-901. There's just a single rule in there that talks about an action for change of name, and it's a pretty long rule, and it lays out the framework. The footnote here is, if it's a name change related to an adoption or a divorce, there's a different process for that, and we'll talk about that near the end. But straight up name changes other than adoption or divorce, it's Rule 15-901. You have to file your petition in the county where the person seeking the name change resides. So that's a jurisdictional piece to keep in mind of. The main components of the name change action, you have a petition, which we'll talk about in detail, a cost waiver form, so that if you're doing a case for an MVLS client, you can have the filing fees waived. And then there are some exhibits. You need to attach the birth certificate for sure as an exhibit. There may be some parental consents that you can attach depending on the type of situation. We'll talk about that more. And there may be some other supporting documents that show why the name needs to be changed or why the person has been using another name. So there are exhibits. You want to include a draft order that you give with the petition to show the court, what it is you want them to change the name to and to make it easy for them. And you also need to keep in mind that if you're trying to take someone's name off a birth certificate, in your petition, you need to ask for that. And in your order that you give, you need to set that up so that you leave when the name change is over with a court order that says not only the name is changed from A to B, but the certain name is going to be removed from the birth certificate. The father who's not the father, for instance. Optional things in the things that you will compile and file, you could have a motion asking the court to allow you to do a notice other than by publication. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is a mechanism where you can ask the court to do notice by posting, in which case there's a notice that gets taken to the sheriff's bulletin board in the courthouse, stuck up in a place where nobody looks at it, and it stays there for 30 days, and then you move on. If you do a notice, if you're doing a motion to ask the court to allow notice that way, you also need to ask the court to waive the sheriff's fees, because I found that the regular MVLS form, that's the cost waiver form, is very easy to use to have the court waive the filing fees. I've found that the clerk, especially in Baltimore City, will then pop up later and say you have to pay the sheriff's fees. And so I end up doing a separate step to ask the court to waive the sheriff's fees if you are asking for notice by publication. Notice by posting. The notice by posting, I have had great success using that where you're changing the name of a minor. In that situation I described before, where mother just determines that the father is not the father and we need to change the name. The court, especially in Baltimore City, seems very willing to allow notice by posting in that situation. I have tried it for other name changes. I've done name changes for much older people for a variety of reasons. And it works once in a while for an older person, but it probably only works maybe 40% of the time, 30% of the time. And it seems, in my experience, to be getting less and less likely to work for an older person. So if you have a minor, definitely try asking the court to do notice by posting rather than publication, because you save the hassle of going to the Daily Record and waiting for them to run the ad and paying for the ad and then trying to get the cost back from somewhere. It's a much easier process if you can get the posting done. But again, if it's not a minor, it's worth a try. I always ask, but you just be prepared that you then may have to shift and go to the publication route. So that's sort of an overview of the framework. The petition itself, it's all laid out in Rule 15901, and it needs to contain, basically the name of the person seeking the name change. You caption it as in the matter of, and you name the person's current name, and you say in the matter of, Jane Smith for change of name to, and you put in another name that you want the target name. You need to list the name, the address of the person, the date of birth, the place where they were born, and whether that person has ever been known by another name. If so, you've got a list of the names and how they were used. Then you make the request for the change of name, and then you explain why the request is being made. Usually it's, like my example before, the paternity test revealed that the person who was thought to be the biological father is not the biological father. And so you lay that out, and then that paternity test would be an exhibit that you file with your petition. You need to have a certification that the individual is not asking for the name change for a bad purpose. If it's a minor that you're asking for the name change, you have to list the names of the parents, guardians, and custodians. We'll touch on that later when we talk about then service of petition. You also need, within, I guess this was the last 4 or 5 years, 5 years ago maybe, the rule was amended to stick in another requirement that you also have to say whether the person who's seeking the name change was ever registered as a sex offender. And if yes, you have to describe the full names that were registered. So I want to go to another slide. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to skip around to this slide. So if you are dealing with a minor, now that you've filed the petition, and you basically file the petition with your cost waiver, with your draft order, along with your exhibits, and any other motions, if you're asking the court to do notice by posting and the request to waive fees for the sheriff, you would do at that same time. You file, the clerk of court, and after you file the petition, if it's a minor, you then also need to serve the petition on the parents, custodians, or guardians. And so this slide highlights that you're basically giving a copy of the petition and the attachments, and you're just affecting service on them so that they get a copy of it and know, hey, somebody that I'm interested in, that I'm either parent, guardian, or custodian for, is trying to change their name. And so it gives them a chance to object if there is a reason for them to object. I wanted to note that changing a minor's name doesn't change their legal relationship with a parent or guardian. It's only, what their birth certificate says. Sometimes when you get to this service issue with parents, you can't find the parent, or the parent makes it hard for you to serve them. So I have found, one, when I'm changing the name of a minor, to streamline the process, if you can get the parents to sign a consent on the front end, it is very handy. A lot of times, the mother will come to you and say, I want to change the name for my daughter. This person is listed on the birth certificate. They're not the biological father. I just want to change the name back to my maiden name. That father, a lot of times, will be anxious to get off of the birth certificate because he's probably just battled with the mother about paternity and has had a favorable paternity test come back. So you can prepare a short consent that just has this father say he consents to the name change, he consents to his name coming off the birth certificate. If you file that with the petition, it makes things a lot easier. But sometimes one of the parents that you need to find, you can't find. And so I'm going to skip to that other slide about alternative service. If you can't find somebody that technically needs to get served a copy of the petition, you need to make good faith efforts to try to serve them. And I have found that you can try to have a process server go and find them. If you can't find them, you do reasonable internet searches to try to find addresses for them. You send notices to them about it to try to have them contact you. You do a couple of things like that. Try to find a phone number that you can call. And then what works for me is I prepare an affidavit that I sign that says, here's what I've done to try to locate the person. I've used good faith efforts based on the information that's available. I've done research. I can't find them. And so then you ask the court to let you to move forward. Let's see. So that's minor issues. That's alternative service. I wanted to go to what happens next. So you filed the petition, and hold on, I'm going to go back to this. Okay. You filed the petition. You'll notice in the rule, in 15901, the rule makes it seem like once you file the petition, the court is going to be super cooperative and kick out this notice for you. And again, this is assuming that you're not convincing the court to do notice by posting. If you have to do publication, the rule basically says that upon filing the petition, the court is going to kick out a notice. And the notice is basically just a heads up about the pending name change. You were to take that notice and then give it to a publication, newspaper of general circulation, and have it published. In Baltimore City, I always use the Daily Record. The weird thing is, my experience in Baltimore City especially is they never kick out the notice. I have to call them a couple of weeks after filing the petition and talk to the clerk's office and say, hey, how you doing? Would love to check on the status of this case. And they pull it up and they say, yeah, what do you want to know? And I say, so do you have the notice that's supposed to come out so that I can publish it? And you have to call them maybe once, maybe twice to try to get them to do something before you can get the court to then kick out a notice. You'll get this notice and then you can have it published. The purpose of the notice is to give the public a heads up that the name is going to be changed, to give people a chance to object. I think that I have done 70 or 80 name changes over the last 20 years. And I've never had anybody object, never had a situation where anybody ever even cares about this, whether it's by a notice in the paper, which I've done plenty of, or I've done lots of postings. For sure, when you're posting something at the sheriff's bulletin board, you never hear about it. But if you did get an objection, the person would have a chance to complain about it, and then there could be a hearing. I think it would be unlikely, but you could have a hearing where you need to respond, and after being served with the objection, you need to respond and say why, what the reason to overcome the objection is. But again, I think if you're thinking about taking a name change, I would not worry about this too much. It's just never happened, and I think that happens very, very rarely.
And Chris, if I might add, in the time that I've been here, the only time I've ever heard of a name change case going to a hearing was a judge that proactively scheduled a hearing because the individual seeking the name change had a recent criminal conviction. And so the judge, it wasn't necessarily contested, but the judge just wanted the person seeking the name change in the courtroom to ask them some questions.
Yeah,
And
why are you changing your name?
Right. That's the only time I've ever heard of any of our name changes actually having a hearing.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's move to the posting. I wonder if it might be previous. Yeah, it's probably back here. I'm sorry. I am jumping around. I apologize for that. But okay, yeah. Back to posting. In case you do try posting, if you have a minor that you're changing the name for, or if you want to see what your luck is like and see if you can get it to work for an adult, it's only a motion. I say do it. I also have a form notice that I would file with the petition to give the court and the sheriff something to use. It makes it easy. It's a very short notice, and there's a sample stuck at the end here that we'll get to. But you file and you ask for the court to allow posting this thing on the bulletin board, and you wait 30 days, and then you would then move forward after that and ask the court to sign your name change order. But this slide here has a little bit more on the difference between the posting and the publication for your reference. The notice, the sample notice is back here. I'm going to jump back there. It's back on page 12. You can see it. It's very short. It just says that the person's trying to change from name A to name B, and the date on which somebody should complain. I always put 15 days in there and then wait 30 for the thing to be posted, but that's a sample you can use. Once let's say you've made it through the hurdle of you've filed your petition, you've gotten the notice from the court, you've published it, you then need to get, or you do notice by posting and you've waited the time. You need to prompt the court then to do something after that. You need to, again, file something at that point, either showing that you've done the publication with an affidavit of publication, or file something to say that the time has run for the notice on the posting. And my experience is, even when you file those things, you have to call the court, you have to call the clerk, usually a couple weeks after, when you haven't gotten anything back, and say, I'm checking on the status of this file. How are you doing today? What does the file show? And they'll say, oh, it's ready to go for signature. And they'll say, well, great. Do you mind sending it for signature? Yeah, we'll get it in the stack. And so then you have to kind of prompt them to move it along. Just want to give you that advice, because you will find that if you file and don't do anything, the court system is perfectly content to not check in with you again and let it sit in some giant black hole. So you have to kind of prod them here and there. But it's not a hassle. You just calendar it and you check in with them here and there, and you can usually move them along. There is a list here. Yeah, I'm going to go back. Sorry. There's a list of forms that you'll find on page 11 of the PowerPoint that has some sample forms for you to use. There's a sample petition, a notice for publication, petition if you're doing a minor, a consent form, and some certificates for publication. But there's some forms that you can get available at that link. Also, the beauty about working with MVLS is they have a lot of folks who have done a lot of name changes before, and so they can hook you up with a mentor. The mentor can give you sample forms whenever anybody reaches out to me to say, I'm doing my first name change. Do you have this form or that form? I usually give them just my whole set of sample forms with the petition and all the things that I like to use so they can use those. But, that's the handy thing about working with MBLS. You've got a lot of resources, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
And I can just attest to that. Chris was for my first case, Chris was my mentor and shared all of his templates with me.
And Susan has way surpassed whatever help I initially gave her. She's way more advanced now, for sure. Let's talk about a couple of special rules for minors. There are, I'm jumping around, back to minors. Hold on, did I pass it already?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, hold on. Sorry about that. I moved the slides around on my own without telling MBLS. So
maybe it's back because we were doing
it's back.
before.
It's back here. Hold on, I'm just going back. Bear with me 1 second. Oh wait, that's for the minor. No, hold on.
Oh.
No. Anyway, for a special rule for a minor, there is a way to change a minor's name without going through a name change action. If the child is less than a year old, there's a procedure in Maryland Health General in 4-214 that provides for one free name change for a parent, and the parents can basically change the name if they had second thoughts. Sometimes you're in the hospital and you come up with a name, and later you think about it after the Petition and all the other drugs have worn off, and you're thinking, what was I thinking? Or you figure out what the monogram looks like, and you're like, there's no way I'm going to do that to that poor kid. And so then you go back and you want to change. Well, you have this one free bite at the apple within the first year. After the year, then you're stuck. You have to do a regular name change action. If there's a minor being adopted, there's a separate procedure for that, which we'll touch on in a minute. Misspellings. There's also a little leeway if you have a misspelling on a birth certificate. There's a process in a COMAR section. It's on this slide 13 in 10.03.01.03 that has this safety valve to allow you to change some misspellings, producing the documents that are listed here. Some notarized letters and from parents and from physicians. But that's a list of the steps that you can follow if you are changing the name of a minor or an adult, even just for a minor misspelling. It doesn't work if you're trying to change the name to something completely different. But I have had a situation where a Catherine was with a K instead of with a C. That's the kind of thing that this would work for. There are also, on page 14 of the presentation, there's a list of some other things that can be presented when you're trying to correct a misspelling. Just leave that there for you. Missing names. Sometimes, a person's middle name is missing, or even sometimes a lot of times I find that in some countries, even the male will want to put the mother's maiden name on in the string of names, and sometimes that's missing. There's a process you can follow, again, using that COMAR process for misspellings. That this process should work without following the name change action process as well. If it's you're not changing a name, you're trying to supplement based on something that was missing that's clearly documentable through some other documents that you have. But if you have those kinds of situations where you're not actually changing the name to something different, you might get a little leeway there. For marriage, there is a process to get your name changed to your new married name it should work for a married person to take their marriage license to the Division of Vital Records and present it as basically their official document showing that their name is now something different. I've never advised anybody about that, but I understand that it works. For divorce, when you are pleading the divorce action, you want to work in the name change piece as well. You just make a request in the action, and if you already have a divorce action pending, you can amend to try to work that in as well. I've never done this either. I have only done straight name changes, but just wanted to give you this information in case the name change question comes up in either a divorce or an adoption. Hold on, I want to get to the adoption piece. Same with an adoption. The name change should be pled as part of the adoption filing, and then I think this is even more streamlined in the adoption. The court will provide a certificate that once it's completed and returned back to the court, I think the court will send it directly to the Division of Vital Records, so you don't have to go through that step yourself. And there's a list on page 19 about the processing fee and the outline of the steps. One other thing about criminal registrations, there is a provision in the Criminal Procedure Article 11705 that for folks who are required to register with their local law enforcement unit, they have to provide a notice if they change their name. And it has to be done within 3 days after the name change. I've not done one of those either, but I just want to flag that for people to keep in mind. It's a handy question to ask your person that you're changing the name for, just make sure they're not required to be registered somewhere. All right, so we covered that and adoption and costs. So we talked at first about the filing fee and the cost waiver that you can use if you're doing an MVLS case. That works pretty seamlessly. When I first started doing name changes, the process was a little more cumbersome. You actually had to do a separate motion where you asked the court to waive the filing fees, and you had to attach an affidavit saying that the person met the income guidelines of the MVLS, and you had to do a draft order and wait for the court to rule on it, and then you could move forward. Now, MVLS on its website has this super easy form. It's one page. The link's up here. The link's
it's to the actual form, but it is linked on our website as well under Attorney Resources.
Yeah, under Attorney Resources, you click on the form, one page. It's got a couple of simple fields where you fill out, sign it, you file that with your petition, and it's good to go. I've never had, since this process was changed, I've never had a court complain or ask me, where are the filing fees? If you are not doing it as a pro bono case, depends on the jurisdiction where you're filing, but there's an estimate up here of what the filing fee is, and then publication costs. With publication costs, if you're doing a pro bono case and you're stuck with having to publish in the Daily Record, cost is typically $80 to $100. I have one time tried to get reimbursement from this PBRC litigation fund, and it worked. Just so keep that as a resource. There is a link up here on page 20 that'll tell you where to go to try to get reimbursed for the publication costs if you have to do that. Again, try posting first, see if you can get the court convinced. If you can post, it just streamlines the whole thing and you avoid this. But if you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let me just add, in terms of the publication cost, a couple of years ago, we checked around in Baltimore City to find out which newspaper of general circulation was the cheapest, and it is indeed the Daily Record. So we also, like Chris, use the Daily Record. The one other thing I would say about the filing fee, there's a little bit of an anomaly in Baltimore County in domestic cases where they do accept the filing fee on the front end, but sometimes in domestic cases, they also require the kind of more cumbersome affidavit as a final cost. I don't know if they'll apply that in a name change case, but I would, if you're filing a name change case in Baltimore County, it's an MVLS case, I would just talk to the family law clerk and make sure that they're not going to issue that final, those final costs. Everywhere else, they just carry it through. If you qualified for the filing fee waiver on the front end, you qualify closing it out with the waiver of those fees. The Baltimore County just treats that a little bit differently. So just a little bit of a red flag there, just to talk with the family law clerk and see if name change, if they're going to apply their sort of policy around custody and divorce cases similarly when it comes to a name change case.
Yeah, and the other snag that I've experienced is the sheriff's posting fee. Even with the cost waiver on the front end, a lot of times the clerk will pop up later and say, okay, great, you got your wish on posting, but now there's a $30 sheriff's fee. And so it's handy to have a motion requesting a waiver of that when you request posting as well. Okay, so that's a little bit on costs. So I usually, once I get the order back from the court with the name change decree, I then will send a letter to my client, and you usually get back 2 originals with a gold seal on it and some red stamp. And I keep a copy of one of them and then send the 2 originals to the client with a letter that explains that they need to go to the Division of Vital Records, present one of the originals, keep the other original in a safe place if the Division of Vital Records tries to take the one that they're presenting, because you never know when you're going to have to present it. And the Division of Vital Records around here is up at Reisterstown Road Plaza, is the one that I know of. It's on Reisterstown Road, just above Northern Parkway. That's the one, the closest one that I've found. But anyway, they show up at the Division of Vital Records. It's a little bit like a motor vehicle administration experience in that it's there's a line and you take a number and it might take some time, but I send a cover letter to the client with the original decrees, tell them that they got what they wanted, tell them that they need to now go to Division of Vital Records, get Division of Vital Records to then issue them an updated birth certificate, and then they can take the birth certificate then to use to change their other IDs. They can go to the MVA. If they really wanted to have a doozy of a day, they could go to Vital Records first in the morning and then go to MVA, go right down Reisterstown Road to Mondawmin Mall, and go to the MVA there to get the 1-2 punch. Spend their whole day at the government lines. But then you go to MVA, change your license, and then you can get your other cards, your Social Security cards, and that sort of thing changed once you have the birth certificate changed. That's the ticket. And of course, you want to notify like the post office and your other important contacts about your new name. And so that's what we wanted to cover for the meat of the name change presentation. So maybe we can see if there are questions.
Sure. And let me just say first, just to kind of give you a sense of the typical clients that come through Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service looking for assistance with a name change. Chris has seen a lot of the minors who, for a variety of reasons, need corrections or a name change. Many of the clients that I've worked with are adult clients, and what has happened is something kind of wacky happened with their birth certificate, and it didn't seem like a big deal when they were growing up, and their parents weren't overly concerned about it. They weren't overly concerned about it. They were living their life, and then one day something went really wrong in terms of their identification, and all of a sudden they have a big problem. So like I had one gentleman that on the birth certificate, instead of his first name, it just said male, which was his gender, of course. And so he was looking for unemployment and could not get through to work down on the docks, and could not get through the employment process because his name, the name he used, the name that was on several of his identification was not actually his legal name. And so we had to resolve that for him. Or I had a client that the name on her legal name, the one on her birth certificate, was not the name that her family always used for her. And that didn't seem a problem until she lost her driver's license. And the only way she could get a new driver's license is to show her birth certificate. And she couldn't get a copy of her birth certificate, to get a copy of your birth certificate, you need to show 2 forms of ID that shows that you're using that name, but she actually never used that legal name. And so she was in this perpetual cycle where MBA wouldn't give her a new driver's license, the Division of Vital Records wouldn't give her a birth certificate, she had a lot of medical problems, and any of us that have been to doctors know the first thing that they ask you for is your driver's license. And she couldn't rent an apartment because she couldn't provide a driver's license. And so, you know, the answer she kept getting was just no every time she asked for help. And the answer that I got originally was no, but, you know, no was not an option. So then we worked together, and thankfully Chris gave me some guidance on that case. And we got her identification resolved for her. And so that's really, particularly with our adult clients, it really creates these barriers around employment and housing and other issues, which is why, you know, this is one of the areas that we provide assistance in. So let's see if we have any questions here. All right. Let's see if I can pull this out. Okay. Okay, so we have a question here that says, where the source of the name change for an adult is marriage, is a court order necessary?
And we think no. We think that you use the marriage certificate and take that to the Division of Vital Records and present it as your basically official document showing that it's been changed.
And I will add, when Chris was talking about both the divorce and adoptions, where you've had, you're including that name change in your pleadings. I have done both of those. And it really just is a matter of remembering to put it in your pleadings. It's not more complicated than that. And then, you know, in Chris's slides, he showed that, particularly with the divorce, sometimes, and we've seen that happen with cases here where, you know, emotions are high, people are thinking about other things in the pleadings, and all of a sudden, you know, post-divorce, oh, I forgot to put in the name change, which is not fatal. I think the slide said someone has up to 18 months to reopen that and change the name, but as well as the adoption, you just want to make sure you put that in the pleadings. Okay, here's the next question. Does the process change for a minor when one parent is deceased?
I have worked on a few like that, and I have basically just recited in the petition that the one parent is deceased when they died, and then I usually just have an exhibit with the death certificate. And so I think you'll find that it works the same way. It's just you're not having to serve somebody else for that parent who's deceased. You're basically just explaining to the court, I've got everybody covered that needs to get notice, that needs to be served notice.
Great. Okay. Oh, this is great. I love all these questions coming through. All right, let me back up here. Okay, next question. All right, has anyone handled name change related to a result of gender change? I have. Have you?
I've done a couple of them.
Okay, well, you go first.
I have, and there are a couple of extra pieces. There's the petition is a little bit different because you're asking. Well, let me gender reassigned.
Well, let me jump in, and then you can, because the question is, it can be actually just a name change. So if someone has already has already changed their gender marker, it can just be a name change case in which you would treat it in all the same ways that we've just talked about. If it also includes the gender marker change, then there is kind of a two-piece process, which is where Chris was going. So there's the petition for the gender change, and in Maryland, there are some specific criteria. The main criteria is that the court has to find that a permanent transition has occurred. Now, permanent transition has some fluidity to it. It can be certainly surgical transition, but that's not required. It can also be a treatment, psychological treatment. It can be medical treatment. It also can be the permanent person is sort of living out into the community, out in public, and the gender in which they identify. And so the court would both do that, which would be a different kind of thing you would have to have changed on your birth certificate, and then also through the MBA And then also you would include that request for the name change.
I was just going to say,
yeah.
I've done it as a combo thing before. Like
yeah,
that.
yeah, right.
But you're right. If the gender reassignment is not a needed piece, it's just a straight name change. Like
yeah,
yep.
Great. Okay, where are we next? All right. When the name on the birth certificate is the same for the mother and child, isn't it clearly an error that you can change with Division of Vital Records, or do you have to always file with the court?
Yeah, I'm not certain about the question about what name would need to be changed. If it's right on the birth certificate, if the mother and child have the same, I'm assuming, last name, I'm trying to figure out if you can send another supplement to that about what piece would you want changed in that situation. It would be easier to answer. I mean, we can jump to the next question.
Okay. My question, let's see. Obtaining a birth certificate. You have a 3-year-old son that was born at home, and none of the methods given by the Division of Vital Records allow us to get one. We were told to request one through the courts, but no one seems to know what the process entails.
Interesting. I did a thing once for an older person who had just made it their whole life, and they were in their 60s, and they were born somewhere in the South at a home, and they did not have a birth certificate. And we never got successful resolution for her because where she was born, she needed to go to that state to get some help in that state. It was South Carolina, maybe.
Okay.
But I've never had that issue in Maryland, but I do recall there's some process to do some alternate documenting of the birth with some affidavits, and I'm just wondering if we could take a look at that. I'm happy to take a look and see what the statute says and see if we can give some other help. If you can send your email in to MVLS, we can maybe get you a follow-up answer.
And one of the things I would say that the case that I mentioned with the client where I was just being told no from the Division of Vital Records, I had to take a little bit of some creative approaches. And so I reached out to the Attorney General that works within the Division of Vital Records, and they were much more helpful in terms of trying to help me problem solve what was a kind of a mess to get resolved. And working with them, I was able to get affidavits from her 2 older brothers who could testify that she indeed was the person that she was saying she was. So we'll look into it, but that's something that I've just found, Division of Vital Records as employees, and this is no criticism, just is very sort of focused on what they do, not so much for sort of creative solutions.
They have a box.
Right.
They have to be in the box.
Right. And so that's been a mechanism that has helped me. But I'm going to make a note here.
We'll try to get more info about that. Yeah.
Okay. So we got some more information here for Chris for this question. Okay. So the birth certificate said child's first and last name is the same for mother and child. However, child has been living with a completely different name her whole life and is now an adult. The Division of Vital Records is refusing to acknowledge obvious typographical error on the original birth certificate, even though Comar addresses errors. Any way to avoid the costly and much longer court filing process?
Yeah, I think that that's probably too challenging for the Division of Vital Records, and it requires too much of a leap of faith for them to connect the dots. I would, if you have a name where there's a letter off or clear missing middle name, that's easier for them to swallow under the Comar process. But I think you're going to be stuck with getting a court order, which means you have to kick off a name change action, unfortunately.
And I would concur. That's the experience that I've had with the division as well. That, like as Chris has said, they sort of have a box in which they operate, and as long as you fit in that box, you're fine. But if you don't, that's not really their focus, is resolving those issues.
Even the one you were talking about, where the person had the first name male.
Right.
complete typographical error.
Exactly.
Right on the face of it.
Exactly.
But the vital records wouldn't even give you a copy of the birth certificate when you showed other ID showing that this person had this other name.
Right.
So
right.
I just think it's too far out of their box for them.
Yeah. All right, I think we've got all the questions. Let's hang on one more minute, see if there's any other final questions. I will, while folks are contemplating questions, just mention we do have a variety of resources on our webpage, and let me just move this back over so we can see here. The screen that you're looking at, if you see there, if you go to the volunteer tab, we're highlighting Pro Bono Portal where you can see available cases, but if you go above that to the Attorney Resources page, we do have a lot of helpful information there, and there is a tab there for recorded trainings. So all of our recorded trainings are housed on that page, and we will be uploading this training and the slides for this training to that as well. And I
do have to stress again, MVLS makes it very easy for a volunteer to find the forms that they want, a mentor to help them if they have questions, if they've got something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. And the website that they have is very easy to use, and they just provide a nice infrastructure for you. And insurance, you've got malpractice insurance. They connect you with the cases that you need, and it's just a great way to help. And they really take a lot of the lift out of it. It's definitely the right organization to work with.
Thank you, Chris.
And name changes are a good pro bono type case for a lot of people, just because there is enough meat to it, but you also can fit it into your schedule in a way that you're not getting hauled into court for some hearing at the same time you have some big work thing going on. So it's a good one.
And it can really have tremendous impact for the client.
Yeah. It's usually a thing that makes a big difference to somebody for them to get benefits or to be able to get a job. It's a significant hurdle, so it is a definite thing that people really are grateful for.
So if anyone hasn't been to our Pro Bono portal, I would encourage you to check it out. It's on our webpage, and all of our cases are listed there in real time, and you can sort both by case types and counties. And then if you're interested in a case, you can just click on Learn More. And I just wanted to mention we have some additional trainings coming up. We're slowing it down a little bit for the summer, but we have 2 trainings coming up on Monday. We have this July 11th training. We also, I didn't upload here, but we have our June 3rd Thursday training scheduled, which is going to be on the intersectionality of tax issues and our human trafficking prevention project. And all of these trainings are free. All of these Third Thursday trainings are just offered, no strings attached, other than we ask you to sign up to be a volunteer attorney if you're not already one. And then some of our more substantive, longer trainings come with a case requirement. But I would encourage you to check those out. Let's just see. All right, so I'm just that's a perfect plug. Someone just mentioned they'd love to see a bankruptcy training. We actually did a bankruptcy training in January. We're just waiting to get the full training back. We recorded that training, and we're waiting to get that back, and we'll upload that on our recorded trainings page. In the last couple of months, we've done one on bankruptcy, estate planning, estate administration, divorce, custody, and then the landlord-tenant and tax training coming up on Monday. So stay tuned. That will be going up on our website very soon. So, okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much. These are great comments. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank Chris so much.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
For being not only a fantastic presenter, but a wonderful supporter of our program. If you have any questions, want to get the slides afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me, and we hope you have a good afternoon.
Take care.
Bye.